There are approximately 7,000 rare diseases that affect 30 million Americans. That means 1 in 10 of us lives with a rare disease. Now, a condition is considered rare if it affects fewer than 200,000 people. The University of Rochester is one institute leading clinical research and therapeutic development of rare diseases. And joining me in the studio is one of the gifted minds involved in that work. She's here to discuss her research and an upcoming event focused on rare diseases sponsored by the U of R. Dr. Erika Augustine, Associate Director of the Center for Human Experimental Therapeutics at the University of Rochester Medical Center. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I know you've been on Second Opinion before, so it's great to have you with us here.
It's good to be here.
So what you do sounds incredibly intimidating for people who may not know, and this is incredibly difficult work, though, and important work. What you do has the potential to reach approximately 30 million people. So for viewers unfamiliar with rare diseases, how would you explain it to them, break it down? And when they hear 30 million are affected, that may seem not so rare. So what makes the disease rare?
Well, individually, any one disease, just like you mentioned, by definition, that fewer than 200,000 people is what we call rare. Every country and region has their own definition of what they consider to be a rare disease. And when you start to think about individual diagnoses that fit under that classification rare, there are some familiar names there. Hemophilia, cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophies, many others. And when you take all of those together, that's where you start to get to those big numbers. And those numbers are important because there are a lot of common threads across rare diseases. Most of them are genetic.
Okay.
Most of these disorders start in childhood. Many of them are neurologic, and the vast majority do not have treatments. So there's really a need to learn from one disease and experience to another.
You said the vast majority don't have treatment. I want to share this. Of the 7,000 rare diseases, this is according to the National Organization for Rare Diseases, only 5% have treatments, and then fewer than that have cures.
Exactly. We have so much work to do.
So talk to me a little bit about, I've heard that it can take anywhere between 5 to 7 years for a correct diagnosis. Is that correct? And are any advancements on the horizon to kind of minimize that time?
That is what we see, these very long journeys to a diagnosis. And part of that goes to the way we've traditionally made diagnoses in medicine. We really learn based on pattern recognition. And to recognize a pattern, you need to see that pattern over and over. And when it comes to rare diseases, you may see one person with a specific rare disease once in your career. And so if it's not right at the top of your mind, if you haven't seen anyone with this same constellation of symptoms before, it can be really hard to hone in on that diagnosis. But there are changes that are happening. There are increasingly, knowing that there's a genetic basis for these disorders, there's more and more use of what we call whole exome or whole genome sequencing. And that's a strategy that allows us to look at all of the coding information or the instructions contained within our DNA without necessarily knowing precisely what we're looking for, to be able to delve into those 7,000 rare disorders and others to try to find a diagnosis. So more and more, I think we're seeing that people are getting to a diagnosis for diseases that we know about and for diseases that have never been described before through some of these strategies.
Well, one that you focus on is Batten disease. So tell me a little bit about who does it affect, what is it, and what are symptoms?
So Batten disease, it's actually a set of diseases, and it's a devastating disorder. You know, we see that most Batten diseases affect children, like I was mentioning, that happens with rare disease. And children have symptoms that include blindness, problems with movement, problems with language and speaking, seizures, loss of skills, and all of the Batten diseases, they result in a shortened lifespan. Some of those very early in childhood and some in young adult years, being maybe the 20s or so. And it's just a devastating disorder. And until very recently, until last week actually, we didn't have any treatments for any form of Batten disease. And now we have the first approved treatment for these genetic disorders, and for one particular form called CLN2 disease. Just last week, a new therapy was approved by the FDA for CLN2 disease.
When
we're
something
excited about that.
When something like that happens, how does that open the door for other possible drugs or treatments?
That's what's so exciting about what we're seeing in rare diseases right now. There's a real interest and a real focus on rare diseases. And that learning from one disease to another, we're seeing that. So this particular approval from last week, it's what we call an enzyme replacement therapy. So in this form of Batten disease, there's an enzyme that's missing. An enzyme is a thing that helps one chemical transform into another. And there's an enzyme that's missing that's critically important for cells. And usually, enzyme replacement therapies, when we give them by an IV, they can't get to the brain. And so this uses another strategy. It actually is an infusion that goes directly into the brain. And that is the first time when they've been able to use enzyme replacement therapies for nervous system or central nervous system kinds of symptoms or problems. So that's one way that we've opened the door. We've shown that we can do that. So for all of the other disorders that have these kinds of enzyme deficiencies with nervous system kind of symptoms, we now know that that might be a strategy for those disorders too. So it opens the door for a pathway. And I think the other approvals that we've seen for rare diseases, there's a new approval for a drug called eteplirsen for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, nusinersen for spinal muscular atrophy. These are huge firsts, but the way in which this treatment happens, the kind of drug that it is, has application for many other rare diseases, and that is just really exciting.
Well, I should say on the 12th, we've got the information about this. The U of R is bringing together regional and national leaders focused on rare diseases. And explain to me just a little bit about how will this symposium not only serve doctors, researchers, but also patients? What can we expect from this?
Well, the idea from this really comes out of that long journey to thinking about treatments. So you mentioned the long diagnostic odyssey, that long path. The path to treatment development is just as long. And there are lots of ways in which we can do that better. We can do that faster, and being able to find more effective treatments for patients with rare diseases more quickly means that we can get treatments to those patients even faster. And so we're trying to think about what are the unique challenges that we see for patients who have rare diseases and for clinical research that relates to rare diseases. And distance and disability are huge factors. So people have this long journey to their diagnosis in part because the expertise is concentrated in few centers around the world. And really being able to meet patients where they are is helpful for clinical care, but it also has the potential to be very helpful for clinical research too. We really need feasible, nimble ways that everyone who wants to can know about research, can participate in research, and benefit from the advancements that are happening in medicine.
And I think something that interesting that you said to me, patients will be involved in the symposium. We've got registration information on the screen available shortly, but I think that's another, you said, key factor is to make sure they're a part of the discussion and the conversation in this work with the symposium.
Absolutely.
Great. Dr. Erika Augustine, thank you for being here today. The Technology and Rare Neurological Diseases Symposium is being sponsored by the University of Rochester, and that is on Friday, May 12th. And the U of R has an online site where you can find interesting articles and also interviews on rare diseases. To learn more, go to trnds.org.